My name is Chen, and I design systems that don't break. For the past 8 years, I've been a lead infrastructure architect for global telecommunications, the kind of work that requires you to think 3 steps ahead of disaster and 5 steps ahead of human error. I build networks that carry conversations across continents, data that powers entire economies, connections that never fail even when everything else does. The irony wasn't lost on me later. I could engineer bulletproof systems for strangers, but I couldn't see the single point of failure sleeping next to me every night. I was in Kuala Lumpur when my life collapsed, 3 floors up in a glass tower that looked out over a city I'd grown to love during my 6-month deployment. The project was the crown jewel of my career, designing the backbone infrastructure for Southeast Asia's largest telecommunications merger. 18-hour days, impossible deadlines, the kind of pressure that either breaks you or teaches you that you're capable of more than you imagined. I chose to be capable. I had to be. Sarah was counting on this promotion, on the salary bump that would finally let us buy the house we'd been dreaming about in Portland's Hills, with the garden she wanted and the workshop where I planned to build the furniture we'd picked out but never purchased. It was 2:47 a.m. local time when the text arrived. I remember because I'd been debugging a routing protocol that had been haunting me for 3 days, and I always check my phone when I hit a wall. The message was from Sarah. "We're done. Take care." 3 words that detonated like a controlled demolition, precise and final. No explanation, no warning, no conversation. Just the end, delivered with the emotional weight of a grocery list. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. We'd been together 5 years, married for 3. She knew about my work schedule, had even encouraged me to take this assignment because the money was too good to pass up. We talked every day since I'd arrived, shared meals over video calls, planned our future with the confidence of people who believed their love was infrastructure grade, built to last. But as I stared at those 3 words, I felt the ground shifting beneath everything I thought I knew about my life. The bank notification arrived 17 minutes later. Our joint account, $127,000 we'd saved together for the house down payment for our future, had been emptied. Every penny transferred out at 11:30 p.m. Portland time, which meant she'd been planning this while we were saying goodnight on video call just hours before. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was surgical, calculated, executed with the precision I'd spent years admiring in her work as a marketing strategist. She'd used those same skills to dismantle our life together, and she'd done it while I was half a world away, powerless to stop it. I sat in that sterile hotel room, surrounded by the detritus of my professional success. Network diagrams, laptop screens full of code, coffee cups that had gone cold hours ago, and felt something shift inside me. The Sarah I'd loved, the woman who cried during animated movies and left post-it love notes in my travel bag, wouldn't have done this. But the Sarah who could orchestrate a social media campaign that moved millions of dollars in consumer behavior, who could identify and exploit psychological pressure points with academic precision, that Sarah absolutely would. I'd been married to both versions, but I'd only been prepared for one. The rational part of my mind, the part trained to respond to system failures with methodical analysis, began to catalog what I knew. Sarah was impulsive with money but calculating with image. She valued social proof over almost anything else, needed constant validation from an audience that had grown increasingly important to her over the past year. Her Instagram following had ballooned to 30,000 people who hung on her every carefully curated post about our perfect life. She'd started calling herself an influencer and a lifestyle curator, terms that made me wince but that I'd supported because her happiness mattered more than my discomfort with her need to perform our relationship for strangers. But now, alone in a hotel room 9,000 miles from home, I realized she hadn't just stolen our money, she'd stolen our story. By the time I could fly back to Portland, she'd have already crafted her narrative. The neglected wife whose husband chose work over love, the woman who finally found the strength to leave. She'd have sympathy, support, and a bank account full of our shared dreams to fund whatever new life she was building. That's when the other part of me, the part that understood systems and patterns and the inevitable consequences of poor decision-making, began to work. If Sarah wanted to play with infrastructure, to manipulate the load-bearing elements of our shared life, then she was about to learn why I was very good at my job. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I worked. First, I documented everything, screenshots of the bank transfers, copies of our text exchanges, photos of the lease agreements, and shared bills that proved the money was legitimately ours. Then I began to research to understand the legal landscape I was about to navigate. Washington State was a community property state, which meant she just committed theft on a grand scale. The text message, sent before the transfer, established premeditation. She'd handed me evidence of her own crime, wrapped in cruelty and delivered at the worst possible moment. By the time the sun rose over Kuala Lumpur, I had a plan. Not revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional, the kind of system failure that created more problems than it solved. What I needed was justice, administered through the proper channels with the kind of methodical precision that Sarah had apparently forgotten I was capable of. I called my project manager first, explained that I had a family emergency but that I could finish the deployment remotely. The project was ahead of schedule anyway, and I'd already trained the local team to handle the implementation. My reputation was solid enough that no one questioned the request. Then I called Elena Vasquez, the best family law attorney in Portland, whose name I found through a combination of bar association rankings and online reviews that revealed a pattern of successful complex asset recovery cases. "Mr. Chen," Elena said when I reached her the next day, "I've seen cases like this before. The text message is helpful, but we'll need more. Bank records, evidence of her spending patterns, anything that shows how she's using the money. Can you get me that?" "I'm working on it," I said, which was the truth. I was working on much more than she realized. While I finished my deployment remotely, working 18-hour days to maintain my professional obligations, I was also conducting a parallel investigation into the woman I'd thought I knew. It started with public records. The lease she'd signed on a downtown Portland loft that cost more per month than we'd been paying for our shared apartment. Then social media forensics, a skill I'd picked up during network security training but never thought I'd use on someone I loved. Sarah's Instagram had exploded with activity since she'd left. Photos of the new apartment, filled with furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Pictures of herself at Portland's most expensive restaurants, always tagged with location data and accompanied by captions about new beginnings and finding herself. She'd started a lifestyle blog called Authentic Living, which seemed to center around spending money we'd saved together to create an image of success she'd never actually earned. But the most damning evidence came from her newfound love of financial transparency. In an effort to build her influencer credibility, she'd started posting screenshots of her business investments and entrepreneurial ventures. Each post was a confession, a detailed record of where our money had gone and how she was using it to build a personal brand around the very authenticity she'd abandoned when she destroyed our marriage. That's when I realized the perfect trap had been staring at me all along. I registered a business in Delaware called Meridian Growth Consulting, specializing in social media strategy for emerging influencers. The website was professional but not flashy, the kind of service that promised real results through data-driven methodology rather than empty promises. I hired a local designer to create marketing materials and a virtual assistant service to handle initial client contact. The whole operation cost less than $2,000 and looked legitimate enough to fool someone whose expertise was in appearance rather than substance. The targeting was almost too easy. Sarah's online behavior created a perfect psychological profile. Someone desperate for validation, willing to pay for shortcuts to success, and convinced that her current trajectory was sustainable. Meridian Growth Consulting's first client outreach campaign focused on Portland-based lifestyle influencers with audiences between 25 and 50,000 followers. The pitch was simple. We'd identified Sarah Peterson as someone with exceptional growth potential, and we wanted to offer her our premium package at a discount as a portfolio-building exercise. She responded within 6 hours. The consultation call was surreal. I used voice modulation software and a carefully constructed persona. Marcus from the legal team would have appreciated the irony, while Sarah described her vision for expanding her brand. She wanted to double her following, monetize her lifestyle content, and establish herself as a thought leader in authentic living. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She was using money stolen from her husband to pay for services designed to help her profit from performing authenticity she'd never possessed. But what made the conversation truly valuable wasn't what she said, it was what she provided. Our premium package required detailed financial disclosure to create personalized growth strategies based on investment capacity. Sarah eagerly shared bank statements, spending records, and even tax documents that showed exactly how she'd been using our money. She was so hungry for external validation that she violated her own financial privacy to get it. Every document she submitted was another link in the evidentiary chain Elena was building for our court case. But more than that, they revealed the full scope of Sarah's deception. She hadn't just taken our money, she'd taken out credit cards in both our names, established lines of credit using our shared assets as collateral, and committed what amounted to identity theft to fund her new lifestyle. The financial fraud was so extensive that it had moved beyond civil matters into criminal territory. Elena filed for an emergency asset freeze 3 weeks after my return to Portland. By then, I'd documented everything. The theft, the fraud, the ongoing financial crimes that Sarah had been committing while performing her authentic lifestyle for thousands of online followers. The court granted our motion the same day, freezing not just the bank account Sarah had opened with our money, but also the credit line she'd established using forged documents. I was in Elena's office when Sarah received the notification. We'd been expecting her response, but I wasn't prepared for how quickly desperation could strip away someone's carefully constructed image. Sarah called me directly, screaming accusations and threats into voicemail messages that Elena immediately added to our evidence file. She hired her own attorney, a criminal defense specialist whose involvement confirmed that we'd moved beyond simple divorce proceedings into more serious legal territory. The unraveling accelerated from there. The landlord of Sarah's expensive loft began eviction proceedings when the frozen accounts made rent payments impossible. Her lifestyle blog went silent as the credit cards she'd been using to fund her content creation were canceled. The social media followers she'd been cultivating with purchased engagement began to disappear as her posting frequency dropped and her content quality suffered. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: her own audience. When Sarah tried to crowdfund her legal expenses through her social media platforms, her followers began asking questions about the discrepancies between her previous posts about financial success and her current apparent need for money. Someone with better research skills than Sarah had anticipated discovered the connection between Meridian Growth Consulting and the court documents that were now part of the public record. The story of Sarah's deception, told through court filings and social media forensics, spread through Portland's influencer community like wildfire. The woman who'd built her brand on authenticity had been exposed as someone who'd stolen from her own husband to finance a lifestyle that was itself a lie. Her follower count plummeted, brand partnerships were canceled, and the social proof she'd valued above everything else evaporated. I felt no satisfaction in watching her world collapse. If anything, it was deeply sad to see someone I'd loved revealed as fundamentally different from who I'd thought she was. But there was a clean logic to it, a kind of systemic justice that felt more like natural consequences than revenge. Sarah had built her new life on a foundation of theft and deception. When those crimes were exposed, the structure she'd created couldn't survive. The court case took 6 months to resolve, but the outcome was never really in question. Elena had built a case so comprehensive that Sarah's attorney recommended she accept a plea agreement rather than face trial. She pled guilty to theft, identity theft, and financial fraud, receiving 2 years of probation and an order to pay full restitution plus damages. The civil court ordered the return of all assets acquired with stolen funds, which meant Sarah lost the apartment, the furniture, the lifestyle props she'd used to build her false image. But more than the financial judgment, it was the social consequences that completed her understanding of what she'd lost. The community she'd tried to join, the influencer network she'd hoped would validate her new identity, had rejected her completely. Her social media accounts, once her source of purpose and validation, became liabilities she eventually deleted entirely. 6 months after the final court hearing, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland. She was working on a laptop in the corner, wearing clothes I recognized from before our marriage, looking like a shadow of the confident woman who'd once performed success for thousands of strangers. When she saw me, her expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, shame, something that might have been relief. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was smaller than I remembered. "I wondered if I'd see you." I sat down across from her, studying the face I'd once known better than my own. "How are you doing?" "Learning," she said, which was more honest than I'd expected. "Learning about consequences. About who I really am when nobody's watching." She paused, looking out the window at the Portland street where we'd once walked together, planning a future that seemed as solid as infrastructure. "I owe you more than money. I owe you an explanation, but I don't think I have one that makes sense." "You wanted something different," I said. "That's not a crime. But how I went about getting it was." She looked back at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something real in her expression. I became someone I don't recognize. Someone who could steal from the person who loved her most, just to play dress up for strangers on the internet. We talked for another hour, not as estranged spouses or legal adversaries, but as two people trying to understand how love could transform into something so destructive. Sarah was working at a marketing firm now, doing legitimate work for a fraction of what she'd made as an influencer. She'd moved back in with her parents and was slowly paying back the restitution the court had ordered. The life she was building was smaller, quieter, but it belonged entirely to her. When we parted that day, I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. Not the dramatic satisfaction of revenge completed, but the quieter resolution of a system finally returning to equilibrium. Sarah had learned the difference between image and substance, between performance and authenticity. The consequences of her choices had been severe, but they'd also been educational in the way that only genuine accountability can be. I kept the house we'd planned to buy together, using the recovered funds as a down payment on something smaller but entirely mine. I took a new position with a Seattle-based firm, designing resilient networks for companies that understood the value of systems built to last. The work was challenging and meaningful, the kind of problem-solving that reminded me why I'd chosen engineering in the first place. Sometimes I think about the woman I married and the woman who stole from me, wondering if they were always the same person or if social media had transformed her into someone fundamentally different. I think about systems that fail and the importance of building redundancy into anything you can't afford to lose. I think about love as infrastructure, about the maintenance required to keep connections strong across time and distance and temptation. But mostly, I've learned to appreciate the elegance of consequences, the way cause and effect operate with mathematical precision when you understand the underlying systems. Sarah thought she could manipulate the variables of our shared life without accepting responsibility for the results. She learned otherwise, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple application of justice administered by institutions designed to protect people like me from people like she'd become. It was enough. More than enough. It was perfect.